Alright, take two. I forgot to hit the button. Record button. Alright, for those, I'm kind of a bit screwed up here. Sorry. Anyway, this video kind of is, I was watching Millennial Woes again, and I was listening to people talk about the clone Germany incident. I have to keep my voice down because it's late at night. I just had to make this video now, that type of thing. And I was listening to a bunch of these people, and this is the second time I've heard them in this live chat with the Millennials Woes guy, and on this subject. And one theme that kept recurring in it is civil war in Germany. Now, will there be a civil war in Germany? My prediction says yes. Now, I base my predictions on just watching world events go on and unfold in front of our eyes and just look at trends and patterns, and then you can almost reference it in history. Now, just about every history shows that every war that's ever been fought, usually the people always say the same thing before the outbreak and after and in the aftermath, that we never thought this could happen here because this is a nice place, right? But yet it happens, and the conditions are completely ripe for revolution in Europe. And I also say that we are living in the time of the 10th Crusade. Now, for some people that might be jumping in onto this channel, I'll get to that in a moment, but for the most part, I was really interested to hear what the people in Germany have been saying. Now, there is a lot of propaganda on all sides coming out, making the clone attacks, putting in footage from years ago saying this happened there and that didn't happen there, stuff like that. So yes, I do agree. Whenever you see the footage that is not legitimate to the actual event, yeah, we should discard that right away. But from that event. But we could also say, but look at the trend. This has been going on for years, right? Now, when I was listening to these Germans, and as I think one was Austrian, the other, and maybe somebody was from Belgium or something like that. So from that region, it was really good to hear their perspectives on what's going on there. But the sentiment I get, I think, is just, I think if anything, the clone Germany attacks exposed how controlled the system is. But I think also as well that you have to understand what the microcrisis is really about. It's really has more to do with the banking system than you would realize. Because right now, if you haven't been looking at the world markets and stuff like that, I'm no financial expert or anything like that, so you have to do the research for yourself. But you'll find that everywhere right now is doom and gloom markets-wise. Over here in Canada, pretty much on the outside, at the top of the world, looking around and watching everything going on, right? I'm watching over there in Europe, and I know that, yes, there are areas in the economies that are doing good, but all of the banking systems are rigged together. There is only basically one Western banking system, and that's a Rothschild IMF central banking system. In other words, the Anglo-American Empire, which is an empire, which is challenging another empire, which is Russia, China, and Iran and all that, in their system, which is the Eurasian Pacific Empire, and these two empires are fighting. Now the problem is the Anglo-American Empire is collapsing. It's the money that the crisis that led up to 2008. The bankers have still been doing the exact same thing. Only this time, this collapse is going to be predicted to be at least 19 times worse. So the bankers know this is coming. Everybody's calling for the worst year in economy for 2016 everywhere. I give you a case in point. The currency's dropping around the world, including here in Canada. Our currency is dropping like a rock. It hasn't been this low since 2003. And it's only going to get worse. And as these currencies drop, purchasing power goes away, people don't buy things, the economies become stagnant. Hello, Great Depression, right? Problem during Great Depression is you'll have revolutions. So what the bankers, and you have to understand that the bankers at the end of it are always in on this. Why? Because you have, I'll give you one name only for this. The big dot connector is George Soros. George Soros openly funds the migrant crisis. He said it himself. He's paying for rafts to bring these people over. You have 14 Jewish groups, Zionist groups, that are basically calling for open door immigration, except for in Israel, but all European countries, and Canada and the United States. And you have basically all these politicians sending propaganda out to other nations in the Middle East and whatever, and all throughout Africa, to come to Europe. They'll pay for everything. They'll give you all kinds of free stuff, and it will give you a free car with a pretty bow on top and a nice blue-eyed blonde-haired girlfriend to go with it, right? So of course everybody's coming for all the free stuff because they've been promised this. Now you have to understand, this is a deliberate act to destroy the European Union. But it's also what you would call, if you look at the 10 pillars of communism, to usher in this new world order thing in full martial law event globally, so that they can crack down on the people. They'll basically take away everybody's rights. This is not paranoia. This is what they want to do. If you listen to the politicians, they pretty much tell you that every bill they want to pass pretty much has something to do with taking away rights. And you're going to notice that whether you vote left, vote right, it doesn't matter. They're all beholden to the same banking system, which funds them, right? So when you're looking at it like that, then you understand there's another, and probably the biggest, like there's a lot of agendas with the migrant crisis. Yes, it's to undercut labor. Yes, it's to get a voting populace, a replacement populace, destroy nationalism and culture, etc., etc., so that they can control the population, right? And also inflate the welfare state, government control, etc. Yes, but the big thing about the migrant crisis is a subversion tactic to create destabilization. And the thing is the other thing it is the migrant crisis is to be used, in my opinion, to blame the collapse of the Eurozone, and the EU will be blamed. The migrants will be blamed for the collapse. In other words, they're useful idiots and scapegoats. Now, as far as the Civil War, yes, I do believe there will be a civil war in Germany. There's no doubt about that. A part of the 10th Crusade is what I talk about, and I'll get to that again in a moment. But the thing is that yes, there will be a civil war in Germany at some point. We're already seeing in Denmark, for example. I think it's Denmark that has the Sons of Odin, this kind of new kind of vigilante group that's just kind of patrolling the streets come out. Now, I kind of get worried about these kind of groups for two reasons. Number one is, where did they, how did they organize so damn fast? And number two, like where did they originate, etc., like that? Who's the founders, etc., etc. That's one thing you want to know. And number two is where did they get all the money to print the T-shirts so fast, the flags, etc., all this stuff. So whenever I see all of this kind of stuff come in, you want to wonder, you got to find out whose money's behind that. Usually grassroots things don't have uniforms. Just my take. So take it with a grain of salt. So they could be using these guys as a political useful idiots. That type of thing. However, groups like, say, and I'm not bashing the Sons of Odin because I don't know enough about them, that's the whole thing, but I do know there's vigilante groups running around Germany beating up refugees and stuff like that in payback. That's basically the beginnings, the birthing pains of a revolution growing right there. So you already have your revolutionaries. But what most people don't realize is, yes, the tip of your spear of your revolutionaries, it works like this. Okay, you have your 10th Crusade, and I will explain that in a second, but first off, you have to understand who your crusaders are going to be. Your crusaders are going to be common everyday folk, okay, in the masses, and they will protest and they will do stuff. Now, on top of them, if you want to look at them kind of like, kind of the shield, so to speak, is going to be your nationalists, the ones that want to really preserve and they're going to get a little bit more rough and more violent. Then you're going to have your ultra-nationalists, which are going to be the shaft of the spear, and they're going to basically guide people into wherever they need to fight back. And then, of course, the tip of your spear will be your neo-Nazis. Yes, today's modern crusader does not look like Richard the Lionheart and Christian Templar monks. It's neo-Nazis, ultra-nationalists, nationalists, and people just concerned for their country. On the other side, where the 10th Crusade comes in, is you have to understand, again, with all these invitations going throughout the Middle East and Africa for people to come in, the governments are just putting the loudspeaker out and rolling out the red carpet for all these people and bribing them, literally bribing them with welfare to come into your country and flood in on the masses. Even if it's a false promise, which I believe it is, it will collapse the state. That's what it's designed to do, and they'll blame it on the migrants, right? But the thing is you also have to understand that groups like ISIS is not one group. It's several hundreds of jihadi groups that have been following an ideology for at least 1,500 years. Not that anybody's 1,500 years old, but the concept is. In other words, they're following jihad. Not every one of them, not every migrant is in on this, but there's a small faction that is. And they're sneaking in, even all the ISIS guys have been saying it. And ISIS is an ideology of a new kind of like Ottoman Empire kind of thing. But what they are is the invading army to create the unrest. Now the thing is it's not just like they don't care what happens to those people. They know the populace, the masses are going to uprise against them, but they don't care. In fact, civil war would be a blessing in disguise to the bankers. They want this. It's in other words, if you understand how social engineering works with the propaganda in the schools, making all the what I say turning out the communist student and social justice warriors. If you can understand what leads to them, then you understand social engineering in its form is a subversion program. Problem, reaction, solution, Hegelian dialect. But the 4 stages of subversion is basically, and if you don't know what subversion is, you can research Soviet-style ideological subversion. First is to demoralize a country or people or whatever. And that might take a few years, 7 to 10 years, right? Maybe 15. Then once you demoralize them, you destabilize them, which you can see the destabilization. Now this destabilization is usually brought on by a bunch of radical groups, and tell me if this sounds familiar to you. You can never, that get elevated by the officials, okay? These radical groups will come in, and they were basically like third wave feminists or people yelling racist and bigot at everything, or invading jihadi armies, whichever you want to refer to them. These people will be elevated beyond criticism. In other words, if you criticize them, and the masses will reject these minority groups that are out there making all this noise. But you will notice that these people are beyond criticism. The government won't let you criticize them. The media won't let you criticize them. The academia won't let you criticize them. And you basically, they use racist, bigot, etc., neo-Nazi, Nazi to basically hush up the masses. You know, they ridicule you. So now you'll have a destabilization. After this destabilization hits, then you will hit a crisis in the third part of the subversion. Now when the crisis hits, then you get the crackdown, which is martial law or whatever. And when that's over, you get your normalization period. Now this normalization period is not going to be very nice. If you want to look at historical references, you can look at, basically communism and communism in itself. Now, one of the people in the millennials, Rose Kraut, said something interesting, that most of the Eastern Bloc countries weren't really that politically correct on this issue, and they didn't really care about being called a Nazi. And I can completely understand why that is. Because they suffered under communism, so and you could see it through a lot of Eastern Bloc countries. Many of them would have probably preferred to be under the Nazis. Not that I'm saying Hitler was good or anything like that. He had some merits, there's no doubt about that, but he had a lot of faults too. So there was good things, bad things. History is always a gray area. It's never just black and white, good or bad. It's the gray area, right? But anyway, I digress from that because people get caught up on those little details. We need to stick to the task at hand. I cannot speak. Oh my god. But anyway, the other thing is one of the gentlemen was talking about how he served in the army and that he's a little bit older, but he's still within drafting age if a civil war breaks out. And he said his biggest fear was to be drafted and to have to shoot back at his own citizens. Now, I know I'm being an armchair warrior here over in Canada or whatever, but again, I don't know if I mentioned about the bloody revolutions that we've had here in Canada. I mean, the first 250 years of Canadian history is pretty much us killing each other left, right, and center. The only break we took of killing each other here in Canada is to go to war with the Americans, or the Americans went to war with us in 1812, and that was our little timeout. Then we went back to fighting each other, a few more civil wars and revolutions and uprisings. In other words, Canada has a very extremely bloody history. So when we get pissed off, we're not so polite. I mean, we were very nationalist here in Canada, more than you would know. It's just our identity is a little bit different than other people's. And up to 40 years ago, we were known as a European descendants and natives. A very common breed of Canadian is Native Irish, French, much like myself, McTontal LeBlancs, Scottish. Pretty much almost all our laws were brought in by Scotsmen. and the British. We were a colony of the British, but we were originally known as France, then Rupert's Land, then Canada, and then before that we've had Vikings here. I get that, but as a nation, as an existing Canadian nation, it really goes back 500 years. But before that, there were tribal wars with the natives, left, right, and center. Nobody ever talks about that, but like the Huron and the Algonquin. But war is not a new thing for Canada. In fact, no war in Canada is a new thing. So last past 150 years, we kind of mellowed out a bit. So okay, let's have some beaver tails and maple syrup, and maybe a little bats bleu. If you've never had a beaver tail, it's not a literal beaver tail, but it's like cinnamon on a thing. If you ever come to Canada, you have to have a beaver tail. Trust me, you have to have that. It should be your mission in life. They are so freaking good. Anyway, case in point is that here in Canada, we are a very docile country, but we are not politically correct on the masses as much as you would think. So a lot of people, look at us as, okay, well, these polite Canadians, they're so politically correct. Well, we're kind of not. We're very outspoken, especially when it comes to the government. If you can find me a Canadian that doesn't complain about the weather or the government, then they're not a true Canadian, they're an imposter. I can tell you that. If you look at posts from Canadians, it's always like bashing government left, right, and center. Because we understand, like, they're all a bunch of assholes, right? And we have one propaganda machine here, which is the CBC. And if you were to put it to a vote, most people would vote away the CBC. I guarantee you. Now, the Millennial Woes host said something interesting, that how much he hated the BBC. Well, I'll tell you what, as a Canadian, I'll trade you the CBC for the BBC. Neither of us would notice, because but the BBC is much further more progressed, politically correct than what the CBC is. The CBC is still kind of like the really mild leftists. They're not full-blown leftists where they can just yell racist bigot, because they do know under it all that the average Canadian, okay, will reject it. They do know that the average Canadian, okay, is usually armed to the teeth. Case in point, yes, the Americans have a big, huge gun culture down there, and 88 guns per 100 people. Canada, it's like 32 guns per 100 people. But the average American has 3 guns. The average Canadian gun owner has like 21 guns. So we're big gun nuts here, but we're polite. We don't yell unless we have to. This is why our media system is very politically correct, but they're more subtle about it. But the comparison to, say, like Sweden or Germany, where they're bashing their people, you have government out there calling their own citizens Nazis, your own government officials, and other government officials out there, the lady of the Green Party, talking about how great it's going to be when they become a minority in their own country and get rid of to get rid of the right-wingers and stuff like that. Yeah, of course the people there are going to realize that the government is really against you. It's what's the saying? You're not paranoid when they really are trying to kill you. But there's another aspect of this. The Germans have probably seen the biggest red pill wake-up call, and the rest of the world seen it. The Germany incident in Cologne really exposes the power of the banking system. It shows the banking controls the government, controls because at the end of the day, just follow the money, you'll figure it out. It all leads back to the banking system. Zionism, banking, it's an agenda, right? Usual players: Rothschilds, Rockefellers, etc., etc. Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, IMF, Federal Reserves, etc., etc. But it also exposed the media as one with the government and with the the banking. Now, chicken and the egg argument, who's running what first, doesn't really matter. They're all in it together, and they're against the people. I think one of the viewers put it very well, that they had enough energy to bring out hundreds of cops to crack down on protesters that were protesting the migrant rapes, but yet they didn't do a damn thing against the refugees. Well, some of them did. But that's also what leads to your revolution, which will lead to a civil war, etc., etc. Now you have to understand, it will go beyond the refugee crisis. If civil war breaks out in Europe, it will go back to European country versus European country once the refugees are gone. Why? Because you're going to be run by ultranationalists. So be ready for that, and neo-Nazis. So what you need to do is use the tip of the spear, but never let them take charge. So always keep the moderate nationalist at front, not the other guys. because it's the moderate nationalists that will save the nations. I hope you guys understand how I'm explaining that. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. I know I usually get bashed anytime I use the term Nazi. Why are Nazis bad? Nazis are bad because they're bad. That's what they do. They're the thuggery. Nationalists, I'm all on board with nationalists, but nationalists are not necessarily Nazi. You have to distinct between the two. The nationalists want to save the nation. The Nazis, well, they're hooligans. They're the ones that you can't control, right? So that's why I say you gotta watch who's playing what and stuff like that. But the thing is with the 10th Crusade that is playing out in front of our eyes, which really kind of kicked off in 2010 with the funding of ISIS, or pre-ISIS. Now they call them ISIS, but basically it went, okay, moderate rebels in Syria. Okay, then all of a sudden the moderate rebels were being infiltrated by Al-Qaeda, but you couldn't call them Al-Qaeda, so you had to then call them Al-Nusra Front and moderate rebels. And Free Syrian Army are supposed to be the moderate rebels. But then what they find is that all these guys are still the same. So then a new group comes out called ISIS, which is made up of about 1,100 jihadi groups. Then when that doesn't work, you got to call them ISIL, and now they're IS, now they're Daesh. Now they're called the Arab Liberation Army or something like that. It's something ridiculous. So but the money is the same and it's going to the same people. And these ideas go back 1,500 years to the times of the Prophet Muhammad. So what's happening is now you have these people with radical ideas with funding, mobility, and weapons. Now what's happening now is those weapons are being pushed into, and they're finding them all over the place, pushed into Europe. So in the migrant crisis in Cologne, yes, you've seen these migrants firing pistols in the air, shooting fireworks. And if you have any doubt that this is government sponsored, number one, they're telling us that it is. But number two, look at the big freighter ship, the Blue Star, and the video footage of that, with thousands of migrants just flooding out as the gate comes down. Somebody owns that ship, right? You've got these luxury yachts going back and forth picking up migrants. Somebody owns that. Right, these rafts, the refugees were getting rafts from, basically leftist French politicians. Again, arm's length from George Soros. These rafts, go price out one of these orange rafts and black rafts that come in. These things are like $1,300, $1,400 a piece, most of them. These are not cheap. And we're talking thousands of rafts. The bicycles coming in from, I believe, Denmark into, or Norway into Sweden, where it was, because they have this crazy law that you can't cross the border by foot. All these bicycles, who's paying for these bicycles? Follow the money, you'll figure out the plan. And you'll find out that they're all in it together. You have 14 Zionist Jewish groups that are calling for open borders. Like I said, it's always the same people. Your Henry Kissinger's, your George Soros's, all the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, all those people. Now here's the thing. If you listen to the Muslim migrants, the radical ones, I get it, there's a lot of them that are not radical, and it's probably a very small percentage that is. But when you're talking, say, 1% of a million, or 1.1 million, whatever it is that flooded into Germany, and another million more, even at 0.1%, you've got yourself a civil war there. You've got yourself a jihad. Now there's two things you need to keep in mind. That many of these Muslims, and you can find video footage out there, refer to Europe as Crusader nations, hence 10th Crusade. They know they're in the 10th Crusade, and now it's funded. It's funded from places like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, etc., etc. In fact, most of the migrants were pushed out of Turkey by the Turkish government into Europe, with the okay and green light of other, well, figure it. You'll follow the migration patterns, you'll figure out who's doing what. Now, the propaganda out there is that, oh no, it's only a handful of them, you don't have to worry about them. But the handful you have to worry about are very, very dangerous. Yes, there are legitimate refugees. Again, I wouldn't want to live in Syria right now. It's been bombed to the shithole, into a shithole. But the thing is, you have to understand is, who destabilized the Middle East in the first place? Well, if you follow the money, it will take you back to the Anglo-American Empire, for sure. But it will take you back to the Zionist neocons in Washington and the Zionist government in Israel. It's if you understand what the Greater Israel Project is, and you might want to look into the Samson option as well, these are big things to research. And when you understand that, then you understand where the root of the problem actually Basically, these refugees wouldn't be coming in or have the excuse to come in if, Western powers weren't bombing the shitballs out of the Middle East in the first place. And it has nothing to do with the women and children and democracy and everything like that. There's other agendas, and if you follow this channel, you'll understand, especially with the World War III updates, you'll understand what's going on in Syria. It has nothing to do with democracy. It never did, never will. It's resources, oil, money, same old thing, right? Banking systems. So that said, when you're listening to these jihadists, and you got Turkish politicians out there talking about how they can't wait to outnumber the European people and breed their women, etc., and breed them out and everything. This is what they're talking about there. So yes, you are up against a hell of a foe. There's no doubt about that. Now, just before the Third Crusade, there was a lot of fighting in Europe, and the problem is that the whether you agree with the Crusades or not, it doesn't matter. But what led up to it was they believed the Holy Land, Israel at that time, was being invaded by the Muslims, and they were taking over the Holy Land, and they had to stop it. Now, with all, I think Spain and Germany were duking it out. France and England were not on the best terms. I think Belgium and France were duking it out. Don't quote me on all the countries, but you get the idea. There was a lot of bad blood. And the Saracens under Saladin said, "No, they'll never have a crusade against us. They're too divided. They'll never unite." But under Richard the Lionheart, he did get them going. And yes, there were 3 failed attempts to take back Jerusalem, but if you've seen what the Crusaders did, they took city after city after city when they united. And yet the stalemate happened in Jerusalem, but it shows you what happens when the Europeans unite and how fast they can. And the thing is right now you're starting to see that where say the Irish and the British, they got a bit of bad blood between them. But I've seen videos from Irishmen saying, we're going to bury that hatchet right now, because you guys weren't so bad after all. When they're looking at Welcome to Dublin, I think the video was called something like that, Welcome to Dublin, and it's like you're in Nigeria. And I have nothing against the Nigerian people in Nigeria, you know what I mean? It's like, but it shows you the root of the problem is it's not about multiculturalism. It's about diluting and eradicating the European majority. That's what it's about. Like white people, it's about getting rid of white people. They don't care if you're a minority. They just don't want you as a majority. And who is they? Well, the they is whoever's in power. Listen to your politicians. There's a lot of double agents out there too in the governments, and talking that makes it sound like they're on your side, but they're not. Again, Putin isn't really out there to save Europe. Donald Trump, I wouldn't put too much faith in him, although if he does one good thing, is he destroys political correctness. Now this brings me to my next thing. This is why freedom of speech is so important. And for those of you in Germany, this is what you have to ask yourself this, and it's the reason why I make the videos I make. Is your nation and your society more important than losing your job for political correctness? Is it more important to call out your enemy in open ground, with unmasked, and call out their evil deeds than to be called racist and bigot? Is it better to talk about the lion circling the herd, or the wolves circling the herd of sheep, than to turn a blind eye to them? These are the questions you are facing, and I don't envy you, because you have some very, very, very tough questions to deal with. That's the whole point. You have to deal with it. Now, when I'm listening to these jihadists talking about how they're going to invade Crusader nations, again, we're not dealing with Richard the Lionheart and warrior Templar monks. We're dealing with, and we're not dealing with Saladin and the Saracens, but we're dealing with ISIS versus European nationalists. That's what we're dealing with. And basically, maybe not just ISIS, but any sort of jihadist-oriented person. And that's what you're dealing with. Now, that said, how you're going to deal with it. Now, I don't believe we're going to see the biggest cultural clash in human history play out in Germany first. I think it's actually going to play out in England. And I'm still putting my money on England for a few reasons. And I guess I should kind of get into that, because I've been saying that for a while. with all that's going on in France, you think the French would be the first ones to revolt against the mass migrations, and they are doing. Even the French police have been cracking down on migrants and beating them up and stuff like that. There is some footage out there. In other words, yes, but even over there in Greece, even with Golden Dawn over there, they haven't been repelling them off the shores. The reason why Germany might be a possibility, and I say possibility, that the biggest human culture clash in human history to take place, in other words, the real kickoff of the 10th Crusade, which will turn into a civil war of about 20,000 versus 20,000 in open street, just like a medieval battle. People will be beating each other over the heads with lampshades, lamps, axes, guns, baseball bats, knuckle dusters, you name it, knives, chairs, whatever you can think of. But that's going to happen in England before Germany. And I think it has something to do with one of what the guest said. She said that the German people will just endure and endure and endure until they can't take it anymore. And I agree. I agree. The Germans will probably be too afraid to undo that brainwashing of political correctness, although the sentiment is growing. Now, the harder they try to crack down with racist and bigot and stuff like that will cause the revolt. They want this revolt. They really do. Why? Because then they can, say, oh, look, see, they're all Nazis. And it's about moral high ground, right? But that in itself is not going to work, because the moral of high ground is still going to be towards the people. But here's the thing, and one brought up a really good point, is all these U.S. military bases in Europe, that if a civil war broke out in Europe, what would the Americans there do? Yes, they will open fire on German citizens. There's no doubt about that. You'll be called Nazis and they will kill you. And I'm not demonizing Americans. I mean, they're my neighbors to the south. But here's why they'll do it. It's the same reason why they're bringing in United Nations troops into the United States. Foreign troops will easily open fire on foreigners. Like the German military, they're going to defect. Most of them are going to defect. The British military, I'd be surprised if 20% of Europe's militaries and law enforcements stay loyal. Because whenever, I call it the penguin effect. When one jumps off the iceberg, they all jump off the iceberg. And I'm not calling for revolutions, it's just you can see it coming, right? And here's what's going to happen, is they're going to defect, and then you need the United Nations armies to come in, which will be made up of foreigners from all over the place. And that's what they're doing in the States. They have a law in the States, for example, that under martial law, they can draft foreigners from around the world to come in and for, basically control the population. This has already been enacted. And in fact, you have UN troops already in a few U.S. cities in the Safe Cities Acts being deployed there. So they're getting ready for this. So it'll be the same everywhere. But the thing is I don't know how loyal the U.S. government or the U.S. troops will stay to the government. In fact, I think we're going to see probably a U.S. military coup in the United States before you see the outbreak of the civil wars in Europe. But they will come. Why? Because when the economy goes, civil war comes. When the invasion gets too much, civil war comes. It's just the way it's going to play out. When an overthrow of government comes, civil war comes. The sign is nigh no matter which way you go, because we're in a really bad place in history because people didn't value freedom of speech enough to call out these leftists 40 years ago. You know what I mean? So it is what it is. We could play the blame game all day, but we've got to deal with it now. That's the thing, and it's going to be everywhere, including Canada. The thing you have to understand is when this kicks off, okay, it's going to be England first, my prediction, because of what England is doing. Number one, they're not taking on the refugees to the degree Germany is, right? And number two, the uprisings there, again, I hear from a lot of British, my British kind of brothers and sisters over there, and I'm not dissing the British, but there's one thing about British and Irish and Scottish and I'd say Australians and New Zealanders have in common. We really kind of have that same kind of temper. We really do. We really do. British, they are polite. They are very crafty, but they're potty mouths. They're really potty mouths. And yes, I love the British because of their witty humor and stuff like that, but they do have this kind of underscored kind of, I wouldn't say rebelliousness, but it's a tenacity that will serve them well when they nationalize. And the thing about the Brits that I think is separate from the Germans is they're a little bit more outspoken, maybe because just the different cultures or whatever, but they're constantly calling out the leftists all the time. I mean, I've never talked to a British person that doesn't bitch about their government. Maybe they're getting a Canadian infection or something, I don't know. But I think that they would revolt before the Germans. That type of thing. The Scottish, I'm pretty sure they would revolt before the Germans. The Irish, well, the Irish are kind of technically just at a stalemate with the IRA, right? But you know what I mean? So you get, and I get the bad blood there, and I'm not trying to stir up, rivalries, because right now they're uniting. They're uniting in ideology. This is where Pegida and like the Swedish Democrats and all those things. I mean, look at Sweden. The Swedish men are completely neutered. I don't think the British men are as neutered yet. And with that, you have more open hooliganism is in England than you do in, and I'm not calling all the Brits hooligans, but I think the Brits are a lot more open about, uh, telling the migrants to fuck their hat. You know what I mean? They're really a lot more open about that, and they seem to be a lot more hardened against racist and bigot. They don't care. They're more fed up. And what'll happen is this: Cameron is out there completely saying no, no more migrants, which will lead to a migrant uprising, I believe, in England, which brings on the culture clash. And what it will probably come out of is either the EU vote to get out of the EU, which, trust me, Cameron doesn't want to get out of the EU. This man goes harder. So A, if there is magically a referendum on the EU and the people decide to get out of it, okay, well then the Muslims will uprise in Europe or in England, and then there'll be a culture clash between what they call, like, say, like the EDL versus or Britain First. I don't know if you guys seen the Britain First guys. I mean, they're training to fight, they're training to smash heads, right? That type of thing. But they're still peacefully protesting. But they're already organizing. Germany isn't doing that yet. Now you got Pegida, yeah, that which is bigger. There's no doubt about that. But it's not quite as pit bullish as Germany's a German Shepherd, Britain's a pit bull. That's the comparison I got to make. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not, but it makes sense to me. But the thing is that the other scenario is Cameron says, no, we're not getting out of the EU. Then it'll be a hooligans fest, and they're just going to run amok, and then you'll see all the culture clash. Because people are fed up with governments everywhere. They know this. The governments around the world know this. That's why their armies are pretty much on standby for martial law. If you haven't been noticing, all the military spending pretty much around the world has been going into domestic equipment. Basically law enforcement getting these Bearcat tanks, and stuff like that. You can see they're getting ready for martial law. All these riot cannons. That's the other thing in Germany, how quickly the German police turned on their own citizens. And it does give me a very scary feel of, what East Germany was like before. I've never been there, but we know what happened in East Germany, that type of thing. And I'm fearing that's what the government wants to do again, but through all of Germany. And I'm thinking that the people will probably, if you're German, you let me know if you think this way or not. But you see the police cracking down on the German citizenry, actual German, homogenous Germans, versus letting these migrants run amok. I think it's pretty obvious that the people know that the government is not in their favor. They must be terrified right now. But I do say the culture clash, the biggest human culture clash in history, will probably happen in England first, and then civil war throughout Europe. It could happen in France. That's my number 2. Germany, I put Sweden before Germany. I think the Swedes, because they're even more repressed in a lot of ways on political correctness, I'd say the Swedes are getting really riled up right now. Now that's starting to hit these Swedes in the pocket, where they have to wait to, when they're going between Norway and Sweden. They got to wait for the police to check their freaking IDs and stuff like that. Look at it in France. They created a moat, to keep them out of the city near Calais, so that they can't get through the tunnel, right, to get to England, and that type of thing. So, I mean, when they're getting to those levels, it's just a matter of time before there's going to be the army of what I call the army of Brevniks coming out. And we're going to see something like that. Now, it most likely will be a false flag when they do this. They'll get a whole bunch of so-called right-wingers, which are really nationalist left, but they're going to get these so-called right-wingers to come out and kill a bunch of migrants openly, like Brevnik, to create sympathy for, and it will be peddled left, right, and center on the mainstream media. Oh my God, these right-wingers are so evil and stuff, and it will be acts of evil, but it is most likely going to be a false flag. That's my prediction, because they need to get control of the situation. But I don't think it's going to work. In fact, I think it'll just inspire more Brevniks. So the control they're trying to keep on this it's nigh, the sign is nigh whichever way. So again, I never call for violence against anybody, really, but you can see it playing out in real time. So if you're German, I'd love to hear from you. Is the sentiment amongst the actual German population, homogenous Germans, are they really pro-migrant, or are you seeing them really starting to realize what's going on and that it's a planned invasion? Do you think there's going to be a civil war in Europe, let alone just in Germany? If you think so, or do you think the first place it's going to and why? And number two, or number three, are you armed and ready, prepared for it, that type of thing? I don't want to see people hurting each other, but I know it's coming. This is why I make these videos, just so when you see it happen, you can get the hell out of the way. But at some point, you also have to understand, you will have to choose a side. You will have to choose a side. You will have to pick your tribe. And I don't envy anybody that's going to be put into this. Stockpile food if you can. Learn how to defend yourself. Yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys. I mean, we are living in very interesting times. But understand, at the root cause of all this is the Anglo-American banking system. This is a manufactured crisis. It was right from get-go. Follow the money. Follow the players. You'll figure it out. And all you have to do is listen to the ones that are toting it the most. And who's funding them? Who funded their campaigns? Who funds this? Who's been paying for the rafts for the refugees? Who's, all these things. And you'll find all these organizations. Almost all of them will lead back to George Soros and a few other guys. And George Soros is one of the most evil people on the planet. But anyway, I'd love to hear from you guys. Again, I don't condone any violence against anybody, but I do understand you guys are in a really bad situation. But it's not just you, it's everybody. And again, I have nothing against legitimate immigrants and legitimate refugees, even here in Canada. But again, we're bringing in 250,000 people per year, soon to be 500,000 people per year from God knows where. The plan is the same all over. Why? Because it's the same banking system everywhere. So yeah, it really, freedom of speech has got to be your #1 priority, because when we start censoring freedom of speech, there is one historical norm that is held true, and if you look at it, you will see that I'm 100% correct. Every genocide in human history starts with the banning of freedom of speech. Every genocide in human history. Every war in human history starts with the banning of freedom of speech. Hence why it's usually the most important right to protect. That's why the American Revolution in 1776, when they written up their Declaration of Independence, that's why they have the Second Amendment, because they thought it was so important to put right after the freedom of speech. They understood freedom of speech is the most important thing you've got to protect. And right after that, you need something to protect that freedom of speech. And that's why they had the Second Amendment. Whether you agree with that or not, but that is the reasoning behind it. And we see now, very clear in this day and age, with the propaganda against anybody speaking out against the refugees, again, my country included, not one critical thought on the CBC here in Canada about the refugees. But the people aren't fooled. The difference here is they have to be very tame about it, and they are, because they do understand it doesn't take much to piss Canadians off. When we get mad, we get really mad. But for the most part, we're pretty mellow and pretty open people, stuff like that. But there are things we won't tolerate. And if what happened in Germany happened here in Canada, the only place it could probably happen and people not doing anything about it would be in maybe Toronto. In Montreal, they would probably get there would be a big, you would get the French nationalists would be in there in 2 seconds. If it happened in BC, the natives would be in there in 2 seconds. If it happened in Saskatchewan, the natives and the what you call it, the Ukrainians would be there in 2 seconds, right? It wouldn't be tolerated at all to that level. And if our medias were there, we'd be frying our medias. Again, uprisings in Canada can get bloody, and I hope they never get to that. But I do understand it's coming here, just maybe about 4 or 5 years later than you guys. We're just a little bit behind the ball. That's all. But it's the same plan everywhere. So I'm going to leave it at that. And again, I'm not calling for anybody to be revolutionary or go out and hurt anybody, but I do understand this is what we're witnessing. I'm seeing all these nationalist groups just kind of popping up left, right, and center, to the point where it's like, yeah, these are the cracking beginnings, the rumblings, the tremors leading up to the big earthquake of the biggest human culture clash in human history. Again, I'm still predicting England, but France could be possibly a second, followed by possibly Sweden, then I'd say Greece or Germany. I'm not putting the German people down. It's just I'm thinking they're nationalizing, but they're not there yet. The Swedes, I think they're ready to snap. But anyway, we'll have to wait and see what happens. So if you like this kind of content, please consider making a donation to the channel. Links down below. Thank you so much to everybody who has. Rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. Be true to yourselves, be true to others. Always do the right thing, and have yourselves a great day. Eh? G'day, hi, and welcome. Alright, take two. I forgot to hit the button. Record button. Alright, for those, I'm kind of a bit screwed up here. Sorry. Anyway, this video kind of is, I was watching Millennial Woes again, and I was listening to people talk about the clone Germany incident. I have to keep my voice down because it's late at night. I just had to make this video now, that type of thing. And I was listening to a bunch of these people, and this is the second time I've heard them in this live chat with the Millennials Woes guy, and on this subject. And one theme that kept recurring in it is civil war in Germany. Now, will there be a civil war in Germany? My prediction says yes. Now, I base my predictions on just watching world events go on and unfold in front of our eyes and just look at trends and patterns, and then you can almost reference it in history. Now, just about every history shows that every war that's ever been fought, usually the people always say the same thing before the outbreak and after, and in the aftermath, that we never thought this could happen here because this is a nice place, right? But yet it happens, and the conditions are completely ripe for revolution in Europe. And I also say that we are living in the time of the 10th Crusade. Now, for some people that might be jumping in onto this channel, I'll get to that in a moment, but for the most part, I was really interested to hear what the people in Germany have been saying. Now, there is a lot of propaganda on all sides coming out, making the clone attacks, putting in footage from years ago saying this happened there and that didn't happen there, stuff like that. So yes, I do agree. Whenever you see the footage that is not legitimate to the actual event, yeah, we should discard that right away. But from that event, but we could also say, but look at the trend. This has been going on for years, right? Now, when I was listening to these Germans, and as I think one was Austrian, yet, and maybe somebody was from Belgium or something like that. So from that region, it was really good to hear their perspectives on what's going on there. But the sentiment I get, I think, is just, I think if anything, the clone Germany attacks exposed how controlled the system is. But I think also as well that you have to understand what the microcrisis is really about. It's really has more to do with the banking system than you would realize. Because right now, if you haven't been looking at the world markets and stuff like that, I'm no financial expert or anything like that, so you have to do the research for yourself. But you'll find that everywhere right now is doom and gloom markets-wise. Over here in Canada, pretty much on the outside, at the top of the world, looking around and watching everything going on, right? I'm watching over there in Europe, and I know that yes, there are areas in the economies that are doing good, but all of the banking systems are rigged together. There is only basically one Western banking system, and that's a Rothschild IMF central banking system. In other words, the Anglo-American Empire, which is an empire, which is challenging another empire, which is Russia, China, and Iran and all that, in their system, which is the Eurasian Pacific Empire. And these two empires are fighting. Now the problem is the Anglo-American Empire is collapsing. It's the money that the crisis that led up to 2008. The bankers have still been doing the exact same thing. Only this time, this collapse is going to be predicted to be at least 19 times worse. So the bankers know this is coming. Everybody's calling for the worst year in economy for 2016 everywhere. I'll give you a case in point. The currency's dropping around the world, including here in Canada. Our currency is dropping like a rock. It hasn't been this slow since 2003, and it's only going to get worse. And as these currencies drop, purchasing power goes away. People don't buy things. The economies become stagnant. Hello, Great Depression, right? Problem during Great Depression is you will have revolutions. So what the bankers, and you have to understand that the bankers at the end of it are always in on this. Why? Because you have, I'll give you one name only for this. The big dot connector is George Soros. George Soros openly funds the migrant crisis. He said it himself. He's paying for rafts to bring these people over. You have 14 Jewish groups, Zionist groups, that are basically calling for open door immigration, except for in Israel, but all European countries, and Canada and the United States. And you have basically all these politicians sending propaganda out to other nations in the Middle East and whatever, and all throughout Africa, to come to Europe. They'll pay for everything. They'll give you all kinds of free stuff, and it will give you a free car with a pretty bow on top and a nice blue-eyed blonde-haired girlfriend to go with it, right? So of course everybody's coming for all the free stuff because they've been promised this. Now you have to understand, this is a deliberate act to destroy the European Union. But it's also what you would call, if you look at the 10 pillars of communism, to usher in this new world order thing in full martial law event globally, so that they can crack down on the people. They'll be basically take away everybody's rights. This is not paranoia. This is what they want to do. If you listen to the politicians, they pretty much tell you that every bill they want to pass pretty much has something to do with taking away rights. And you're going to notice that whether you vote left, vote right, it doesn't matter. They're all beholden to the same banking system, which funds them, right? So when you're looking at it like that, then you understand there's another, and probably the biggest, there's a lot of agendas with the migrant crisis. Yes, it's to undercut labor. Yes, it's to get a voting populace, a replacement populace, destroy nationalism and culture, etc., so that they can control the population, right? And also inflate the welfare state, government control, etc. Yes, but the big thing about the migrant crisis, it's a subversion tactic to create destabilization. And the thing is the other thing it is the migrant crisis is to be used, in my opinion, to blame the collapse of the Eurozone, and the EU will be blamed. The migrants will be blamed for the collapse. In other words, they're useful idiots and scapegoats. Now, as far as the civil war, yes, I do believe there will be a civil war in Germany. There's no doubt about that. A part of the